I would like to talk about a large picture in terms of geology. That's for us plate tectonics. And we experimented with emerging technologies like drones, and drone created surface models, how we could use that in mining environment like open pit mapping for geology, extracting geological data and structures. I touch on how we could use Leapfrog for teaching, learning structural geology. And we have a wish for Seequent, what we would like to see developed further in the future. This is the big picture of Indonesia, a satellite imagery and a plate tectonic sketch in this example, where we can see that in relation where we are as a mining and exploration company in North Sulawesi, most of our operations are here, and we want to know if we are at the right address, and if we are, why, in order to find great mineral deposits in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, the Indo-Australian plate is going under the Sunda Trench, and the Sunda-Banda arc is stretching along 6,000 kilometers to the east, turns around the Banda Sea, and it gets really mingled and mingled up, complicated in the area of Sulawesi, which is the most tectonically active and complicated area, exactly where devastating earthquake and tsunami just happened in September in Indonesia along the Palu Koro Fault, which is the showstopper for all the tectonic activity at the edge of the Sundaland. So in image, what we see as a general model for the big picture, that the investigator ridge and row rise is going under the plate and will create disturbances in the area, such as thickening crust, shallowing angle, differential stresses, opening up tear faults, etc. These are generally believed to be ingredients to form world-class mineral deposits in large section of subductions. But for North Sulawesi, this is not the case. So we have to think outside the box, and this is perhaps Leapfrog could come to our help. And North Sulawesi, basically 700 kilometer east-west stretch of land of this complicated shaped island of Sulawesi, and hosts more than 350 mineral deposits, mostly porphyry and related epithermal type deposits, intermediate sulfidation, high sulfidation. And they are arranged in some ways that they form sectors, they form east-west belts, and they form in alignment with northwest-southeast orientation that we locally call the corridors. That's very important. So we want to understand what are the reasons for the distribution of these deposits and what are the underlying reasons. Well, we did a lot of standard exploratory data analysis. We even invented our own stress field model, which depicts a complicated picture. We have highly emerging mountain ranges, ridges, and subsiding basins, sometimes very close to each other, and the vertical distance between these surfaces can be 6-7 kilometers. So really something significant is going on. So we realized that we could use vast amount of publicly available open source three-dimensional data, for example, bathymetry surface and earthquake database. So this is exactly what we did. We pulled it into Leapfrog and used the power of Leapfrog of 3D visualization and understanding what's going on. In this image, we just see the two-dimensional view of the three-dimensional data and immediately start to see some trends, how the seismic activity occurs along trenches, subductions, and there are major breaks along the distribution of these points along strike and across strike. But the real power of Leapfrog is to visualize this point data set into 3D. And once we do that, we start to see large-scale, plate-scale features, such as oceanic plates. For example, along the east section, we see a double plunging Molucca plate. As we move towards the B section, we see that the yellow Molucca plate at depth collided with the Celebes C plate, and that could induce some tear on the slab. And along the C section, basically the yellow main deep Molucca plate completely detached at a shallow and deeper level. Behind the C, we have an area indicated with red zones. These are the highly emerging mountain ridges, and the whole system stops along this fault, which is a major strike slip fault, the Palu-Koro fault, where such devastating earthquakes can occur anytime. So this is simply a point data so far, but we want to give some kinematic representation of this point, and we can do that freely. Again, public source, we can download solutions for these earthquake points in terms of what type of faults they represent. They could represent strike slip faults, truss faults, and normal faults. So with this information, we feed back into our point model, but this time we have a structural model. We can plot these as structural points with the Leapfrog display as a structural disk, and we can do the detailed analysis for certain parts. This is the eastern part of North arm of Sulawesi, where we see the Celebes plate is going under southward, the Molucca plate is going oblique, and they collide at depth, and this oblique collision could induce a stress regime at a higher crustal level as a transtensional fault system, and exactly what we see in North Sulawesi, a series of range fault system, basin and range morphology. So with the power of Leapfrog, we can dynamically visualize that. We slice through from the Philippines towards North Sulawesi. We can see the Philippine plate, the Celebes plate, and the Molucca plate, the double plunging Molucca plate, fully subducts in both directions under Halmahera. And as we reach the tip of North Sulawesi, we have these transfer faults coming across, and along the transfer faults, Celebes plate is plunging steeper and deeper and colliding with the Molucca plate that can induce a push and an eventual detachment of these major plate segment. So this is how we can put the story into movement, and the end product is a solid crustal or plate model where we model the Molucca and Celebes plate with the two different colors. And there are subcolors. They represent segments which are the ones bound by transfer faults. These transfer faults could act as a tear fault on the slab, and eventually these slabs break off towards the western area. So this could be the results for the segmentation of the ore deposits between these blocks, and also the linear arrangement of the ore deposits are just a projection where these plate collides at depth. So this is how we try to use Leapfrog to see the bigger picture, which is the plate tectonic picture, and completely different what we have for other parts of Indonesia. So the other topic today I would like to show you is about drones, how we use drones for geological mapping. So drone is basically, this is what we call drone modeling. It's basically a flying camera. You can see a simple off-the-shelf drone here, equipped in this case two cameras, and we just fly a pattern above the area of interest. In our case, this is open pits in our mines, and we have some fixed and temporary ground control points, so that's how we control the precision of the drone model. And this is what the drone sees during the survey. So the upper window is the actual video of a drone fly in a mining open pit environment. The lower image is basically a virtual reality image of the surface of that pit. This is created within the photogrammetry software, and this is what we are going to use, sorry for that. So this is the virtual reality geology, if you want, or the pit, a three-dimensional surface, and then this is what we are going to use in Leapfrog environment. But let's look at quickly what type of surfaces these models can provide. They can provide very dense point cloud classes, the points with RGB information. It's a three-dimensional image, if you like. We can have solid surfaces, meshes, wires, but most importantly, we will use textured surfaces or in the forms of object files. These object files are the final product and can be, since 2017, can be put into Leapfrog environment directly, and they will lack the angular and spatial distortion of imagery from the old times where we had to use ortho images and drape down onto the three-dimensional surface separately. It's especially useful when you have vertical faces, such as bench faces or vertical parts of or cliff. This surface can be directly used to digitize planar data and point data. With the planar data, we just digitize a three-dimensional string along the surface, and the Leapfrog will compute a best fit plane for that particular surface. But it's still driven by a geologist. We have to see and understand what we're seeing. For example, a shear with some kinematic indicators, faults, and bedding planes. And these will have a better constraint in terms of location and size, rather than using a single survey point on the bench when you're doing the bench mapping. So the planes can be easily constructed within a bench or across benches, but the surface has such a details that will allow us to put point observations. So this is like a virtual compass or a digital compass, if you like. In here we show fractures with brown disk and gold-bearing quartz veins with a red disk. And together, the planar and point data you can analyze in the classic stereo net environment. But if you wish, you bring that stereo net into the virtual space and you compare your data analysis with the visual imagery. So this is a bench scale example how we could use these models. In an ideal case, you would have multiple surfaces which are surveyed at different times during opening a pit or developing the mine. In this example, we had a surface scan before opening the mine, but has no visual information. We used only geology. But once we open the mine, there is a multitude of very well-defined geological features visible, such as lithological contacts, beddings, faults. And in this example, we have a small satellite pit for 40,000 ounces of gold. And the mineralization is centered along a felsic dike. And that felsic dike feeds into a sill and cross-cutted by important camp scale structures, and that defines the distribution of the geology. So that's very useful single pit or satellite pit scale, but we successfully applied this drone mapping modeling technology for the entire mine. This is the ultimate pit of the Penjom orogenic gold mine, where even at that scale we could extract easily lithological contacts, beddings, north-south faults, and shear zones. With this way, you can put the story of your geology for resource update or investors in a nutshell. You can tell the story. We have here a folded sedimentary sequence that is intruded by felsic dikes and sills that folded into an open fold and inclined fold, and the back of the fold developed the principal shear that cut the sequence into a well-mineralized footwall sequence. Mineralization forms along bedic parallel and shear parallel veins, and they have an actual plunge where we have very high-grade ore shoots, and we have a bulk mineralization hosted within tonalite dikes and seals. And that's the story of a couple of years of mining and geological development. So you can very strongly represent your Leapfrog model with this underlying visual three-dimensional model. But we successfully applied the drone mapping technique for different types of deposits where we do not have a lot of visible details. They are obscured by alteration and oxidation. These are examples of high sulfidation mines in North Sulawesi. And importantly, here we managed to model out in three dimension like clay domains or metallurgical geometallurgy domains for the deposit. These are particularly important because of the low-cost heap leach extraction of gold. These high clay content domains should be avoided. Some instances we have super high resolution of the surface where even within a bulk stockwork mineralization, you are able to pick up even a centimeter as single individual fractures, so you can do a structural analysis of the surface if you want to, the individual structures. So one of the, we do a lot of regional and greenfield exploration, and a drone comes very handy if you have large outcrops that you don't have time to access, so safety issues arise, and you just fly the drone 5-10 minutes, create the surface, bring it into Leapfrog, and extract the most relevant geological features which you can put into your regional geology model if you want to straight into a large model of Leapfrog. One of the advantages of this modeling technique, you can build these models even without flying actually the drone. I call this the pseudo survey method. You can use Google Earth imagery and extract high resolution surface images, pull it into Leapfrog and do your analysis. In this example, I have the Grasberg deposit in Indonesia, where you can easily see that we have a belt parallel and an oblique set of strike slip faults. They intersect in the actual plane of the Yellow Valley syncline, and that's where they host this major world-class deposit. So you can have your own individual unbiased analysis of ore deposits. If you are an economic geologist student or a professor, you can do that without going to the site or relying on other publications. So this is where I think Leapfrog is one of the greatest structural geology tools. And I remember my first structural geology teacher. He was actually a student of Angelier. So what I really got hundreds of stereo nets and try to understand what they represent, try to visualize. So never had a chance to enjoy sheer beauty of faulted rocks. Even today, I'm trying to understand more, and I take examples from reputable publishers and major publications to understand that particular fault. So I found this location on Google Earth and created a three-dimensional model. And once I start looking at, I can solve all the problems just visualizing that particular outcrop. And this exercise, you can scale it up to a much larger example from North America, a textbook example if you're teaching or learning structural geology, a thrust-related large-scale fold in the Canadian Rockies. And you have your own way of seeing and the actual model, so you can remember much better. And lastly, it's a wish. If we could use the core imagery into Leapfrog at a sample level or at a meter level in this case, it's an experiment. We try to bring in the image, and we managed to have good enough details at the meter scale, where you can see the mineralogy, you can see texture, you can see bedding or structures, and you can see the difference between the sample in relation to the big difference of the gold grade. This is an example of a skarn deposit from North Sulawesi. So this is really it I wanted to say, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for Seequent, the opportunity to come in here.
Thanks a lot there, Krisztian. We've got time for a couple of quick questions, and we've got someone at the back there. Steve wants to...
Wow, that was awesome. I'm right here. I'm not very tall, but you can probably see me. Really great work, nice presentation. I think what you and J Resources have done is fantastic. Going back to the earlier part of the talk, on the plate tectonic sort of modeling, that's something I'm familiar with. I assume that you guys have plotted up the distribution of ore deposits and volcano sedimentary basins and intrusions from the various geological maps, and see how they relate to your tear faults and changes in slab geometry. And then you know the age of many of these systems, some more accurately than others. Do you see any time, space, or age progressions for any of these with respect to some of these structures? Can you say some of these structures were active and influenced geology and mineral deposit formation for a certain period of years?
Very good, thank you. Very good and complex question. I would say that for North Sulawesi, we have a long known sort of dual timing for forming ore deposits. We have a late Miocene and a Pleistocene period. We unfortunately don't have new age dating for our work. We have a lot of new data. They do not include age dating. And I think this dual nature of timing could be something to do with the initiation subduction of the North Sulawesi Trench, and then actually the collision of the Molucca plate with the Celebes plate, at least for the eastern part of Naos, where we have in fact larger number of deposits, we have larger grades, gold grades, and we have a bit more prospective areas in general, but unfortunately we're not a research institution, we're a mining exploration company. We're trying to use the tools we have like Leapfrog and then see what else can be brought into like open source data or any kind of things like that. Okay.
Fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Someone has something? Well, in that case, I'd like to join me in thanking Krisztian again, please.